The teaching that you're about to hear this morning is part of our year-long campaign that we are calling the Year of Biblical Literacy. You can find out more over on our website at midtownbiblicalliteracy.com, and there you can find reading plans, resources, podcast episodes, all in an effort to help us raise our understanding of the Bible. So with that in mind, enjoy this teaching.
Our scripture today is Ruth 1:16 through 17. But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. And may the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." This is the word of the Lord. Congregation, thanks be to God.
Well, hey, good morning, everyone. How are we? Great. Real quick, before we get into the sermon this morning, you may have noticed that we're a little lighter this morning. You might prefer that, where you're not having to fight your way to a seat, and that's because it is spring break right now for our USC students. And yes, woo. And we sent about 80 of our Midtown college students to Panama City for the week, with about a dozen plus of our older Midtown members to hang out together, to study scripture together, to pray, to worship, to serve the city in Panama City Beach. And I don't want to gloss over that. So in case you're noticing hey, where'd everyone go? That's where they are, and would encourage you during this week to pray for them. It's pretty beautiful. We haven't done a big spring break trip like that since 2020 for obvious reasons. And it's what happens near every single year. And I guarantee you it's going to happen again during this week. But usually what happens is there is someone not associated with our church family at all that gets involved with the spring break trip and gets to know biblical community for the first time, becomes a Christian. And usually what happens 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, we are going to see someone, a college student, go into that trip, meeting Jesus, getting baptized. So I'm just going to say it's going to happen. And in the meantime, let's just pray for God to continue to work on that trip. And wanted to thank y'all for a couple reasons, because a lot of these students are going to experience deep biblical community that y'all set, the culture you all set. They get to downstream receive the blessings of that. And if you're a Midtown member, your generosity helps go to make that trip possible. We scholarship a number of students every year who can't afford that trip. And so because of your generosity, they get to receive the blessing of that. So thank you for that. Let's continue to pray for our college students. And let's get into our passage this morning. We have a new series. So if you have a Bible, turn to Ruth chapter 1. Ruth chapter 1. And if you remember from last week, we finished our series Torah Stories last week, where we talked about Joseph and what do you do when you face these unforeseen circumstances, when you undergo all this suffering. And we saw Joseph's response. And today in this chapter, we dive into that theme a little bit more. And we're asking the questions: what happens when life is less than ideal? What happens when you're under pressure and you don't know what to do? What happens when, no matter your age or season of life, you look at all that's happened to you and life didn't turn out the way you wanted it to? What do you do? What's interesting is the Bible gives us answers to those questions, but not in the way that we normally think. So as modern Americans, when we ask questions, what we typically want back is a nice, clear-cut set of answers. Just give me the facts. Just tell me what to do. And the Bible answers those questions, but not by giving us the clear-cut answers most of the time. The Bible, more often than not, gives us story for us to sit with and meditate on and to wrestle out the implications to our questions. It's not as clear-cut as we want them to be, because the Bible knows the better thing when you ask those questions, the better thing that sticks with you is a story. And in fact, all good stories do this. All good stories teach us something without ever outright explicitly saying it. So think about it like this. If you are not content with your life, and I wanted to tell you just about how good life actually is and why you ought to be content, I could tell you that, or I could play the movie for you, It's a Wonderful Life. That would probably be more effective because stories have the power to stick with you way more than just a clear-cut set of facts. If, for the kids in the room, if I wanted to teach you about overcoming loss and how to process grief and how to be connected with others in your grief, I could tell you all about why you should connect with others, or I could play up for you. You know what I mean? Because stories have the power to stick with you. Like if I wanted to tell you the importance of being interconnected with family members and friends through thick and thin, who have your back no matter what, who will always defend you no matter what you're going through, I could cite all the statistics and studies and articles, or I could tell you the story about a group of street racers in Southern California led by the Toretto family, which is the Fast and Furious franchise. What I'm saying is stories stick with us far better than a set of facts. And the Bible knows this. And that's why the Bible, more often than not, gives us story after story after story. On top of that, what we're going to see in the book of Ruth is that the hero of the book is not who we would expect it to be, because back then in the ancient Near East, some 3,000 years ago, the heroes of the story were generally men with power or prestige, and they come from some well-known, well-respected background to signal to the reader, this is who you should listen to. This is whose advice you should listen to. You should follow the example they set. But as we're going to see, as the Bible so often does, the book of Ruth subverts this. The hero of the story, the book of Ruth, centers on this female character, which was very uncommon back then. This unlikely hero with no power or prestige of her own, which is very weird at that time. On top of that, she's a foreigner from a minority group that most Israelites would have hated at the time. She's this outsider. In the New Testament, they call outsiders, they call them Gentiles. And yet here she is in the Bible. In fact, Ruth is the only Old Testament book named after a non-Israelite character. And yet this book is celebrated so much because it speaks so well into the human condition, how God is at work, even in the details, even when you can't see him. And as a result, the Jewish people for over thousands of years, still to this day, read this story, the book of Ruth, out loud during one of their major festivals called Shavuot, or in the New Testament, it's called Pentecost, to commemorate her story and how God provides through it all. So if you have a Bible, we're going to start in verse 1. And for this series, we're just going to be working through an entire book of the Bible, just line by line, verse by verse. So start with me in verse 1. Says, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. All right, so part of reading whole books of the Bible is we need to ask ourselves just a general set of questions to get a lay of the land as we unpack a book. Questions like, when is this? Where is this? Who are the main characters? And within these first 2 verses, we're already given a lot of those answers to kind of navigate verse by verse. So when is this happening? Well, we look at verse 1. This happened in the days when the judges ruled. So this is a reference to the book of Judges. That's when the story takes place. Judges takes place soon after the events and the writing of the Torah. So you have the first 5 books, and then you have Joshua where they settle into the promised land. And then you have Judges. And Judges is one of the darkest books in the Bible. So essentially, God's people, they cross into the promised land that was promised all the way back in Genesis 12. And you would think, this is awesome. This is a homecoming of sorts. God has finally made due on the promise he made some 100 years ago or so. And yet, when you hit the book of Judges, everything just descends into chaos. It says this refrain in the book of Judges: everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Just morally, there was nothing off the table. Everyone did what seemed fine to them. There was no king in the land. Everyone turned their backs on God and turned to idols. And as a result, it's just chaos, just tragic scene after tragic scene. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so the book of Ruth takes place at some point during the narrative of the Judges, like 1200-ish BC. So that's the when. What about the what? What is happening? Again, look back at verse 1 in the text. It says there's a famine in the land. Now, so there's no food, that people are starving, but I don't want to gloss over that because, again, if you look back to the Torah, God says a famine would happen in the land, specifically in Deuteronomy 28. God says, if you turn your backs on me, if you do what's right in your own eyes and follow idols and just do whatever you want, I'm going to turn my back from you for a season so that you see life apart from me goes really bad for you. So in Deuteronomy 28, God says, one of those consequences that I want you to see, like the consequences of turning your back, one of them will be a famine in the land because God, out of love, wants his people to see things go bad when you do what's right in your own eyes. So as a result, the crops aren't coming in. The people are starving. This was maybe like top 3, one of the worst things that could happen to you as a society some 3,000 years ago, right up there with a nation conquering you or another nation like killing your family. A famine was like national disaster, survival, crisis sort of situation. So already verse 1 opens and there's this like dystopian wasteland of a backdrop. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It's morally dark. Food is not coming in. People are dying left and right. This is like, Walking Dead, The Last of Us sort of type background here. That's what is happening. And then as for the where, again, look at verse 1. It sets all this up for us. This is happening at first in the town of Bethlehem. The nation of Israel zooms in on this one small town called Bethlehem. Now, what's wild is Bethlehem comes from 2 Hebrew words. It comes from Beth, which means house, and it comes from Lehem, which means bread. So think about the irony here. There's a famine in the land of Israel. There's a famine in Bethlehem, the house of bread. You're supposed to see the irony there. It's like, imagine you go to IHOP and you're like, I'd love some pancakes. I'm sorry, we don't have pancakes. It's like, that's what you do. It's in the title. It's like if you go to Taco Bell, they don't have tacos. Pizza Hut doesn't have pizza. Yeah, I'm saying this is a big deal. You're supposed to see the irony. Isn't it ironic? A little too ironic. And on top of that, you have these characters. It zooms in even more on this family. You have the husband, Elimelech, his wife, Naomi, 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and they travel to Moab in search of a better life. We have a map up on the screen. So there you have Bethlehem, sort of in the top left-ish, center-ish sort of area. And then you see Moab is all the way down on the bottom right. So they had to travel quite a distance, more than likely on foot to get to Moab. And they're traveling all this way in search for food because they're starving. They're dying here. So they go to Moab. Now, some quick background on Moab. This was a people group that the Israelites hated. They looked down upon them. They were outsiders. They were pagans. The Israelites thought of them as backwards people. So they were this minority group. And we're not going to get into it, but would encourage you, if you want to know more about why the Israelites hated the Moabites, there's this weird story in the Torah in Genesis 19. Not the most family-friendly text, but would encourage you in your spare time to read that. It's weird. But all this to say, the Israelites looked down and hated the Moabites. Verse 3, but Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. And these took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. They lived there about 10 years. So we already see within verses 3 and 4, conflict arising. Elimelech, who is the patriarch of the family, introduced at the very start of the book, dies, which is already like a bit of a twist. When you read that for the first time, you would think the patriarch of the family, obviously, he is going to be the main character, the hero of the story. No, within a few verses, dead already. And on top of that, we have new characters introduced. Elimelech's sons take 2 foreign wives, 2 Moabite wives, Orpah and Ruth. perhaps so that they can still grow their family, even though their father's dead. Maybe while they're in Moab, they can still try to grow a family. But then the unthinkable happens in verse 5. And both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So everyone but the women die. And on top of that, Mahlon and Chilion had no children. Now, why is that a big deal? Because back then, if you wanted to make sure that you were protected and provided for, the main way that happened was through your family, in particular, your husband, your sons, your grandsons. The larger your family, the bigger your network of relationships, so that people could provide for you, so that you were safe and protected. But while in Moab, in search of a better life, everything goes sideways. What was meant to be this opportunity for a better life all goes wrong. And now here's Naomi with no husband, no sons, no grandkids. She's a widow with nothing to call her own. On top of that, Orpah and Ruth are in a similar boat. They are left without their husbands to provide for them. So now we have these 3 women in verse 5. They're widows now in this deep place of vulnerability. What's going to happen? Verse 6. Then she, meaning Naomi, arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So think about it like this. Back then, some 3,000 years ago, if you're a widow and you wanted to make sure that you were provided for, you had about 4 options. Option number 1 is you could go work in the fields. You could do some hard labor day in and day out to earn your keep. But the thing is, Naomi is too old for that. So option number 1 is not really an option. Option number 2, if she wanted to make sure she was taken care of, she could remarry, because back then, family was everything. That's why you generally got married in those days, to have a family. It wasn't so much about romance. It was about having a large family so that people could take care of you. But again, Naomi is too old to have more kids. So option number 2 is not really an option. Then there's option 3. If you're a widow, your children could take care of you, but her sons just died, so that's off the table. Then option 4, she could go back to her homeland and rent or sell her family's land out. But she has to sell her land to make ends meet, so she can't really rent out her land. She has to give that up just so that her basic needs could be met. And that actually comes back later on in the book of Ruth. We'll get into that in the next couple of weeks. So all this to say, Naomi is out of a lot of good options. She has nothing, and in the midst of this, she hears this whisper of hope that the famine is over in Israel. So what's she going to do? Verse 7. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house." In other words, go back to your family. "May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." In other words, she's saying, go get remarried. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. In other words, Naomi, she's walking back to Israel. Her 2 daughters-in-law are still following her, and the people who were meant to provide and protect them are dead. And Naomi in this verse is essentially trying to shoo them away, to stop following her. The reason being, Orpah and Ruth, they still have options. They can go back to their homeland where they have families who can protect and provide for them. They're still young enough. They could go work the fields. They're still young enough. They could remarry and have children back in their homeland to make sure they're still provided for. So everything about the situation makes sense if you're Orpah and Ruth, to just go back home to make sure you're provided for. Verse 10, and they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way. I'm too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Do you hear the logic in Naomi's words? Do you hear the anger and the grief Naomi's logic makes a lot of sense. She's saying, look, if you're looking for someone to take care of you, I can't do that. So go back to your family where you will be taken care of. There's nothing I can give you because my life is over, but you still have a chance. It doesn't have to be the end of the road for you two. So go back to your family. Start a family of your own while you still have time. Verse 14, then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. Orpah listens to Naomi's advice and goes back to Moab, which makes complete sense to do. But Ruth, according to verse 14, says that she clung to Naomi. That word clung in the Hebrew is the Hebrew word devak. Can you say that word with me, devak? Devak means, it says in there, to cling. It also means like to attach, to unite yourself to someone else. That word devak in the Old Testament generally is associated with making covenantal vows to someone else, which if you're reading this text for the first time, it's a very weird thing to do. Think about it. Orpah leaves Naomi so that she can move on from this terrible chapter in her life and start fresh. Ruth doesn't. She clings, she devaks to Naomi, even though Naomi has no options. And Naomi notices this is a weird response too. Read with me verse 15. This is Naomi. Naomi said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. Naomi's like, see what your sister just did? Go do that. Look, she's not that far away. You can go catch up with her. Just get out of here. Just leave me alone. Just get. It reminds me, and this is just how my brain works, but remember that scene in Air Bud? When he's like, get out of here, Air Bud, and like throws a stick, but the dog doesn't want to. And he's like, just go on, just get. And then Air Bud finally leaves. That was no joke the first movie I've ever cried in. Like that scene tore me up. Anyway, that's kind of how I picture in my brain. Naomi's like, get out of here, move on with your life. This is no good for you. Just go. And then I love this. I imagine Ruth basically interrupting Naomi and telling her to shush. Check it out, verse 16. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. So in this moment, Ruth says something completely unexpected. Naomi's saying, go find a better life back home. Find a better life somewhere else. Leave me alone. Get. But Ruth stays. She clings. She devaks. She sort of covenantally commits herself to Naomi. Ruth basically says, hey, cut it out. Stop talking. I'm going where you're going. I'm in this with you for the long haul, for richer, for poorer, till death do us part. So stop trying to talk me out of it. I'm all in. Keep walking. She chooses to cling with Naomi, even though Naomi has nothing to offer. And on top of that, what do you think will happen when a foreigner like Ruth from a land despised by Israelites enters Israel at the time of the judges when everyone does what is right in their own eyes? This vulnerable young woman, what do you think is going to happen? It's very likely, of course, she'll be hated and looked down upon, but I mean, it doesn't take much. It's not hard to imagine what could happen to her if she goes that way back to Israel. You see, as an immigrant, immigrants tend to immigrate to another country, another land in search for a better life. But everything that's clear is if she goes to this place, if she immigrates, life is going to be noticeably worse. There's no one to protect, to provide for her. She's this looked down upon minority group in the time of the judges. Now, the big question we have to ask, why? Why would Ruth do this? Why would Ruth go against conventional wisdom and stay with Naomi, who has nothing to offer, where her life could very likely be much, much worse? Well, there's a clue in the passage that I just read, but before we get back to that, let's keep on reading. Verse 18. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Naomi realizes she can't talk Ruth out of it, so Naomi just sort of shrugs, says, all right, fine. Verse 19. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" See, Bethlehem was a really small town in Israel. Everyone knew everyone. And you can almost imagine the scene where people are looking at the outskirts of the land and they see two women slowly come walking back. The people of the town all gathering and saying, "Who is this woman coming back? This is Naomi." Do y'all remember Naomi? She left some 10 years ago. She left with her family, with her husband, her son. Where are they? Is this Naomi? Who's this Moabite that she has with her? What's going on? And it's almost like Naomi hears all the gossip circulating around her to where she says this in verse 20. Naomi said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" Like we said before, names mean something in the Bible. The name Naomi means pleasant, but here, as she's talking with everyone else, she's saying, look, there's nothing pleasant about my life. All that's marked by my life is bitterness and pain and suffering because of what God has done to me. So don't call me pleasant. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. This is who I am now. Verse 22. So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest. And that's it. That's chapter 1. So this is the backdrop. This is all set up for the rest of the story. Here's this old cynical widow and her foreign Moabite Gentile outsider daughter-in-law. And they're both out of options. They arrive to a small town in Bethlehem. And the question that will permeate the rest of the book is what's going to happen? What will happen to them? What will come of their problem? Now, as we step back from the text, I want us to look back at it again. Now, you may have not noticed this at first. You may have, but notice how there are three main characters that have a different response to the same set of circumstances. Let's look back at that again. Here's what I mean. In verse 1, there's a famine, some massive devastation. You don't know when the next meal will come. You're in survival mode. And we are told of three different responses, three ways to respond when you're under the pressure, when life doesn't turn out the way you want, when life is not what you signed up for. The first response we see is Elimelech. And what does he do? Well, he responds to the situation. He responds to the famine by moving his family out of Israel into a foreign land, which, as I'm reading that, I'm thinking, that makes sense. You know, I have kids and I think I might be in that same boat of, okay, my job is to protect and provide for my family. And I can't do that here, but I hear that there is food over here. So I'm going to move my family over here. To me, it's like, at first glance, I read that. I think that makes sense. I think I might do the same thing, but there's more going on. So like I said, God said a famine would happen if Israel was unfaithful back in Deuteronomy 28. God says, if you do what's right in your own eyes and follow idols and just are so in sin, just entrenched in doing things your own way, there's going to be a famine in the land. And yet Elimelech, as an Israelite, knowing this, would have also known that just a couple chapters later in Deuteronomy 30, God says in that chapter, when there's a famine in the land, when XYZ happens to you, I want you to notice that and respond by asking me for forgiveness. I want you to turn back from your idols. When a famine happens, I want that to be a sign to you to give up your idols and turn back to me and to repent and to ask for forgiveness. And if you do that, I will heal your land. You see, the famine was an opportunity for repentance. Just stay put, realize that this is because of your idolatry, but turn to me. But notice Elimelech does not do that. Rather than repent and stay in the land that God provided for Israel and ask for forgiveness, when the pressure happens, when the heat gets turned up, he takes matters into his own hands. He tries to fix things on his own. He compromises what he knows to be true about God and instead goes his own way. You see, Elimelech When life doesn't go the way he wants it to, he chooses the path of unrighteous decision-making. He chooses to take matters into his own hands and compromises. And in the same way, we can easily be tempted with that too. When life is less than ideal, when our circumstances are not what we want them to be, rather than stop and examine ourselves and to take it to God and to take it to godly community, we can easily go the path of compromise, to take matters into our own hands when we are under the pressure to do whatever we can to fix the immediate situation at hand rather than first taking that to God. Obviously, this can look like a number of ways in life, but the short of it is you can say you trust God. But when the heat gets turned up in your life, you will do what you think is best. To take the path of compromise and say, look, I know life is busy and hectic and chaotic. I know I should be in biblical community, but I don't have time. Let me just look out for myself and my family first. Or the path of compromise could say, look, I am in biblical community, but again, life is busy, life is stressful, so let me just do the bare minimum while I'm there just so that people can get off my back, but I'm still calling the shots here. To take the path of compromise and say, look, yes, I know God calls me to be generous. I know God calls me to be hospitable, but have you seen my bank account? Have you seen my house? So maybe once I fix that and things get sorted and settled, then I can start thinking about this stuff, but not right now. So please get off my back. Let me just try to fix things right now. To take the path of compromise and say, I know life is tough. I'm under so much pressure at school, at work, with my family, with life. So I don't have all this margin that you talk about to take this stuff to God in scripture and in prayer. And quite honestly, I don't know if I want to, even though I should. Maybe if and when life lets up, I can think about taking this stuff to God. But right now, let me just try to figure this out, okay? To take the path of compromise and say, look, life is the same day in and day out. It's hard enough and I need a break. So what's the big deal? So that I can get some rest and relief is if I just catch up on my shows or scroll on my phone or shop online. I know I should get to the Jesus stuff eventually, but right now, this is working for me, okay? And like Elimelech, the way of compromise can make so much sense on the outside. And hear me, please, okay? What I'm not saying is you just be passive whenever stuff comes your way. You have agency for sure. So yes, put a plan together. And yes, all of that, but bring it to God. Bring it to godly community. Bring it to him in scripture and in prayer, because more often than not, what happens is when a problem comes your way, and you may say, yeah, I'm a Christian, and yes, I'm involved in this church, I'm in a life group, but so often than not, when this hard circumstance comes your way, you're going to do what is right in your own eyes and make the decision and then just inform church family after the fact. But the reality is when these hard circumstances, when you're under the pressure to bring that to him and community first. And the path of compromise, of taking matters into your own hands, when you do that, God becomes an afterthought or no thought at all, and it can lead, like Elimelech, to decay and further brokenness and a spiritual death, a slow spiritual death. In the face of suffering, Elimelech shows us option one, to respond with compromise and unrighteous decision-making. So that's the first response. Then we see the second response with Naomi. What does she do? Well, she responds to the same initial situation Elimelech did. She sees the famine. She moves out of Israel into Moab. And after all that happens in the chapter, she responds in bitterness and despair. Do you see that in verses 20 and 21? Look back at that. She said, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Notice she doesn't just acknowledge the pain, but she identifies herself in the pain. The pain is who she is. Don't call me Naomi. Don't call me pleasant. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. This is who I am. Now, this is an intense reaction, so much so she changes her name. And I've done some research. As far as I can tell, if there is a character I'm missing out on, please let me know. But as far as I can tell, there are 13 characters in the Bible that have a name change. 12 of those 13, though, their name is changed by someone else. As far as I can tell, Naomi is the only character in the Bible who changes her own name, which tells you this is an intense response to her pain and suffering. And then she doubles down, verse 21. She says, I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? Not only does she identify with her pain, but she blames it on God. God, this is your fault. God, you did this to me. You could have done something, but you didn't. Naomi's life is so blinded by pain to where even when her daughter-in-law, Ruth, chooses to cling to her, Naomi can't see it. Naomi doesn't ask why. She doesn't notice how potentially beautiful that is or how God might be at work in front of her. Instead, she seems to just roll her eyes and move on, so stuck in her pain and grief. She's so self-absorbed. She's unable to see anything good. And on top of that, she tries to isolate herself in her pain rather than try to understand whatever it is that Ruth is doing. Naomi chooses the path of bitterness. And we can fall into this narrative too, where Elimelech was, life did not turn out how I wanted it to. I need to fix this apart from God. Naomi's narrative is, life did not turn out how I wanted it to because God is against me. Now, if I may say the hard thing, some of you are letting your pain and your trauma identify you. This is who I am. I can't move on because of this event in my life or because of this season that happened to me in my past. And some of us wouldn't say, call me Mara, but we would say, call me my addiction. Call me my depression. Call me my parents were absent. Call me my trauma. Call me my mental health diagnosis. Now hear me, please. There is absolutely a time and a place for grieving and lamenting. There's so much Bible on the topic about grieving and lamenting. I mean, we're going to do a whole series in the summer looking at the book of Psalms and bringing our whole selves to God, being open and honest and transparent with him, brutally honest. But there's a fine line between healthy processing and godly grief in community, to look beyond yourself, to seek wisdom, to seek help. And then there's primarily looking at yourself, obsessing over your pain. For some of us, for most of us, obsessing over your pain can easily lead to blaming and condemning God, which leads to self-absorption, which, like Naomi, leads to isolation. And yet the data is out. When you obsess over your pain, generally speaking, it does not lead to mental wellness and mental wholeness. Talking about your problems all the time generally makes the problems grow. And when that happens, you become like Naomi. You become stuck, entrenched in the pain, entrenched in the grief, unable to see anything else beyond the suffering and the hurt. Bitterness can manifest itself in a number of ways. God, why did you let this happen to me in my past? All this talk about finding my joy in you sure feels like wishful thinking. I mean, if you really knew my life, if the people around me knew what I've been through, I think they'd be saying a different story, telling me something different. God, I tried to do the right thing. I tried to be a good student, a good friend, a good spouse, a good parent, but it didn't turn out how I wanted it to. Why, God? Why? God, I'm trying my best. I really am. I know I'm not perfect, but I honestly try to faithfully follow you. Maybe you're a leader in our church, a life group leader, or a volunteer leader in our church, and maybe you're feeling this. You're just burnt out and exhausted and a little jaded and a little cynical. God, I wanted to do this thing because you wanted me to do this. And this is the thanks that I get? Really? Really? If you loved me, things would have been different. My life would have turned out differently. I think people would have at least shown me some encouragement or some appreciation, but I'm just bitter. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. Why, God? Like Naomi, we can become so entrenched in our bitterness at God that we begin to write a narrative about him and miss out on what he might be doing right in front of us. To not see the good happening around you, to be so self-absorbed and isolated from others. But then there's a third response. There's Ruth. And what does she do? Think about it. She's kind of a byproduct of the same initial situation, the famine, by marrying into the family. And all of that happens in the chapter. Notice how she responds. Look at verses 16 and 17. Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. From where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, there I will die, and there I will be buried." So Ruth instead, she clings, she devots to Naomi. She makes this covenantal vow to Naomi, even though Naomi has nothing to offer. This is weird for a couple reasons. She chooses the harder option by sticking with Naomi. She's given up her homeland, a secure future, her family ties, her former religion to go with Naomi of all people. At face value, this looks like a terrible gamble. Why? Like I said, there's a clue buried within the text, specifically at verse 17. Let's look at the second half of verse 17. She says, "May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." May who? Yahweh. Ooh, that's good. When you see Lord in all caps, underneath that is God's covenantal name. I was going to ask you all that, but whoever said that is like, yes, that's it. That's incredible when you think about it. That whenever someone in the Bible or the author says Lord in all caps, they're evoking God's covenantal, intimate, relational name. Only people in relationship with the God of scriptures were able to evoke the name Yahweh. So here you have this young widow, this foreigner, this Gentile from a hated people group, this pagan background, and yet she seems to be in on something no other character in this chapter, not even the Israelite characters, are in on. The non-Israelite knows something about Yahweh that the others don't. And that's what enables her to say the unexpected thing, to say, look, Naomi, I'm not going anywhere. Biblical scholars cite this is one of the clearest moments in the entire Old Testament we see of a conversion experience. She gives up her homeland, her geography, her family ties, her religion, her identity, and commits herself. She clings herself to God and his people. You see, Ruth's speech in verses 16 and 17 isn't really about her commitment to Naomi at all. It's really about her commitment to Yahweh. To put it another way, why does Ruth cling to Naomi? The reason is she's able to pledge herself to Naomi because she has pledged herself to Yahweh, to God. She's saying, Naomi, the reason I belong to you is because I belong to God. I know we've suffered much. I know the future doesn't look too bright for me in Bethlehem. I know I'll be rejected as a Gentile. I know I'll be ostracized as a widow. I will likely be cast aside and cast out. But your God is my God, and I'm not going anywhere. I'm all in on Yahweh. You see, Ruth gives us another narrative when life is not turning out the way we hoped. Where Elimelech says, this happened, so I'll take matters into my own hands apart from God. Where Naomi says, this happened because God is against me. Ruth says, yes, this happened, but I will choose to be faithful. I will choose to trust that God is at work, even if I don't understand exactly how or why. And this narrative is available to us too when life happens to us, to say, I will choose faithfulness, even when life is not going the way I want, because I know Yahweh. I will choose faithfulness, even when I experience loss, even when I experience heartache, even when I'm day in and day out exhausted, because I know God is with me. To say, I will choose faithfulness even when my life is filled with pain and hurt, because I know God loves me and I know what God can do. I know that God can bring beauty out of the pain. And I know, even though I don't know how, that God is doing something here so long as I hang on, so long as I trust him, so long as I continue to obey and trust that he is at work. And in the midst of all this, we see at the end of chapter 1, this glimmer of hope. That even though God is not overtly in this book, we see him working behind the scenes in the story. And that's why the end of the chapter ends the way it ends. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest, it says. So chapter 1 starts with a famine in the land. Verse 22, it ends with a harvest. We see this spark of hope where the start of the chapter begins with death. We see life springing forth. You see, God is still working. The story is not over yet. In all of this, God is still faithful to his people. He has not abandoned them. He has not forgotten them. He has not and will not turn his back on them. He is still good. He is still working. He is still moving. The story isn't over yet. And that means for you, wherever you are, whether your life is filled with setbacks and challenges, whether it's filled with pain and loss, whether your life is filled with worry or unmet expectations or whatever it is, God is still good. God is still working. And that means your story isn't over yet either. And the good news is this is just the beginning of the story. And this story of one family is but a micro story of the larger story of how God deals with his people, Israel. This is a story that showcases God's covenant love, God's unwavering grace, God providing always on the move, even when you can't see it, even when God seems invisible to you, that he's at work. He is still working. The story isn't over yet. And that invisible hand, that covenant love, that act of grace we find all culminates in the person of Jesus, who, like Ruth, is the hero of the story no one expected. If Ruth is the outsider in this small story, Jesus is the outsider in the bigger story. The one who, like Ruth, was despised and looked down upon, yet with unwavering trust and faithfulness, does the thing no one expected, by providing for us our greatest need, by offering himself for us on the cross for our sin and conquering death so that we could be made alive, so that me and you, much like Ruth, Gentiles in our own right, could know the deep love of God. Now we'll dive more into how this story connects with Jesus, and there's a lot more. So come back in the coming weeks. I mean, I kid you not, this is already a long sermon for me, but I kid you, there was like another page of just like all these cool like Bible Jesus connections, and I had to like pump the brakes. And it's like future weeks we'll get there. But for now, come back next week. For now, let me leave you with this. When it comes to the narratives in your life, will you be like Elimelech, trying to toil and work and take matters into your own hands apart from God, to try to write your own story? Will you be like Naomi, blaming God and isolating yourself from others? Or will you let Ruth's story and ultimately Jesus' story be your story? To trust that God is at work in you, to let God write and shape your story, to see that he is still providing, and that through Jesus we know, as long as there's still breath in our lungs, he still has more work to do in you. Will you pray with me, please?